The Baltimore Ravens just made a move that has quite literally split the fan base in half. Now, on one hand, you have people that are calling what they've done safe. On the other hand, you have people calling what they've done a flat-out mistake. And then you have those who still don't understand at all what just happened. But here's the truth. When you line up what the Baltimore Ravens just did and sit that next to what the Buffalo Bills just lost, one of these franchises just took a leap forward, while the other may not realize what they just gave away. I'm Rob Love. This is One Flock. Let's fly.
Let's go Ravens, let's go Ravens, let's go Ravens, let's go Ravens. We are one flock, we are one flock, we are one flock, we are one flock.
What's good, fam? Welcome back to One Flock. I'm your host, Rob Love. And first things first, I have to say this. You guys, I love you. I appreciate you. I tell you that all the time. We're officially just under 1,600 subscribers, and that doesn't happen without you engaging, debating in the comments, rocking with the channel, disagreeing, and just pushing this thing where it needs to go. And I got to tell you, I appreciate that. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here, you already know how we get down. Hit that like button, subscribe, tap the notification bell, and send this to one Ravens fan and one Bills fan, because today, that's what we're talking about, and it's about to get uncomfortable. Let's get into it. This offseason was chaos. The AFC didn't just shuffle around coaches. It literally reset power structures. Now, the Ravens, we know they fired long-tenured John Harbaugh. The Bills surprisingly fired Sean McDermott. Pittsburgh made a move nobody saw coming. And suddenly, half the conference is asking the same question. Did we actually get better? Or did we just move pieces around? Today, we're starting where the rivalry never ends. Ravens versus Bills. Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen. Baltimore versus Buffalo. What we all are talking about all the time. The chaos created when both of these franchises fired their head coaches at the end of the season has been quite the whirlwind, to put it lightly. Eric DeCosta, when you saw him at the press conference, looked like he hadn't slept for days. And honestly, I get that. When you're operating at the level, the pressure, the decision-making, the nonstop information, your margin for error gets real small real fast. That's actually a perfect place for us to pause for a second, because I get it. I understand it. It's been tough even covering all these changes. How to keep my energy and my focus when we're breaking down this stuff and keep it detailed? Well, for me, it starts first thing in the morning with AG1. One scoop, water, done. It's not about hype. It's about consistency, gut health, mental clarity, sustained energy without the crash. When you're trying to keep up with the big picture, tracking coaching trees, scheme fits, why franchises rise or fall, you can't afford fog. And AG1 keeps me locked in, especially during the long prep days like this one. And here's the part that matters for you. If you're a first-time AG1 user, hit the link in the description. You're going to get over $100 in free product as part of that welcome bundle. If you've been meaning to tighten up your routine this year, I'm telling you, this is a great place to start. All right, so let's get into it. Because once you strip away the chaos, the headlines, and the emotions, what really matters is who made the right moves. Who actually won this coaching cycle? Well, before we even talk about who these teams hired, because we are going to talk about that, we have to be honest about what they lost. Because Sean McDermott wasn't just a head coach. He was a defensive architect long before Buffalo ever handed him the keys. Let's rewind. Sean McDermott came from the Jim Johnson defensive tree in Philadelphia, one of the most respected defensive systems of the last 20 years. That's 2 decades. Now, as a defensive coordinator in Carolina, we know what McDermott did there. He built a unit that was ranked top 10 in points allowed, top 10 in yards allowed, and they were known for their discipline, communication, and situational excellence. Keep that in mind, because he was the defensive coordinator for the Panthers team that went 15-1 and reached a Super Bowl. That defense wasn't flashy. It was just sound. It was adaptive, and it was brutally consistent. When Buffalo hired McDermott, that's why they hired him. He didn't just change the culture. He masked their roster deficiencies with structure and discipline. And why do I say that? Look at Buffalo's defensive roster. There's no names there that just blow you away. And yet, their defense throughout the year overperformed relative to their talent, especially in the secondary. And that matters because now he's gone. And when Buffalo lost Sean McDermott, they didn't just lose a head coach. They lost the guy who was quietly keeping their defensive floor high, even when injuries, age, and turnover, quite honestly, should have pulled it down. That is a real loss. Now let's compare that to Baltimore and what they lost. John Harbaugh. He was a special teams coach by background, not an offensive architect, not a defensive play caller. He found value in the culture that he brought, stability and delegation. But over time, let's be honest, that stability became stagnation. And his influence on situational football and offensive decision-making actively hurt this team in key moments. So when Baltimore moved on from Harbaugh, they didn't lose a schematic edge. Buffalo did. Now, I want you to think about that. That's a major difference. That means when we grade these head coaching changes, we're not starting from equal ground. You can imagine it this way. If we put numbers to this, because feelings don't win arguments, on a scale of 1 to 10, what did the loss of a defensive mastermind like McDermott result in the Bulls experiencing? Experiencing. Got Chicago on the mind for some reason. They were hoping to get Giannis. Anyhow, Buffalo losing McDermott, you got to give at least that a -7 impact, because who else was elite for their defense? They lost the defensive floor. They lost schematic continuity on the defense. They lost a proven problem solver on defense. And who else do they have on the staff to replace that? Nobody. I'm giving them a -7 with the McDermott loss. Baltimore, in the meantime, lost Harbaugh. What did they really lose? Well, the impact. Did they lose culture? Yes. But that was beginning to get stale. I mean, wasn't everybody kind of tired of hearing, who's got it better than us? I mean, the locker room had to be tired of that. You could tell by the faces when you saw the locker room shots. The fans, I know, were getting tired of it. So minimal loss even with the culture. Schematically, what were you losing with Harbaugh? Special teams that he hadn't really called or really been a specialist at in almost 2 decades. You also removed a bottleneck created by John Harbaugh being one of the most powerful head coaches in the league, reporting directly to Bisciotti. Can you imagine being a coordinator underneath a guy with that kind of power? If there's a difference of opinion, guess whose opinion often was taking the lead? The guy who wasn't a great defensive mind, the guy who wasn't a great offensive mind, the special teams guy, the 18-year-old special teams guy. So that removal of the bottleneck, culture loss, I grade it as just a -2 for the culture that Baltimore lost. So right away, just from the losses, Baltimore starts off, at least on our grading scale, 5 points better than the Bills after theirs. -7 with the Bills, -2 with the Ravens. But let's get to the most important comparison in this entire conversation. Who did they replace those guys with? Who are the head coaches that they plugged back in? Because once you strip away emotion and you look at the resumes, this becomes very clear. We're going to start with Baltimore. The Ravens hired Jesse Minter. Now, this wasn't a gamble on potential. I've gone on the record to say I wasn't the guy who thought we should hire a defensive-minded head coach? Simply because they're more plentiful. And if you got to think about who you want to hold on to, I was thinking the more elusive, elite offensive mind would be who I would want to plug in as a head coach, just so no one else could poach him. Then we could go get an elite defensive coordinator to be the defensive coordinator. The Ravens thought differently. They hired Jesse Minter. He's not just a gamble on potential. He arrives as a proven defensive elite play caller. His units have been dominant everywhere he's been. And where's that been? Well, we know at Michigan, his defenses weren't just good. They were elite. They were disciplined. They were structurally sound. They were top tier in scoring defense, elite in limiting explosive plays, elite on third down, all things the Ravens need. They were elite in situational football. And that matters because that's where Baltimore historically has thrived and in recent years has felt the pain of falling off. Then Minter comes to the NFL and works alongside Mike Macdonald. What does that defense become? We remember we were there. Multiple fronts, disguised coverages, pressure without reckless blitzing, confusion for quarterbacks. And here's the key part that people keep missing. Jesse Minter was already calling plays. This isn't a coach who's learning how to call a defense. This is a coach being in full control of something he's already proven that he can dominate. And when I say proven he can dominate, let me explain exactly why I say that. Because when Jesse Minter left Baltimore, to become the guy, the defensive play caller for the Los Angeles Chargers, he wasn't walking into some loaded unit. In fact, he was walking into a problem. They were one of the worst defenses in football, bottom tier. They had leaking secondary. They were giving up points at a terrible rate. They had no identity. They had no edge. And in one season, what happened to that defense? Under our guy, Jesse Minter, that leaky defense went from bottom of the league to the top. Not improved, not competitive, elite. Since then, his defenses with the Chargers have lived in the top 5 of nearly every major NFL defensive metric. I will read them for you. Points allowed. Third down defense. We could use some of that. Red zone efficiency. Pressure rate without blitzing. With the exception of one category, they still ranked top 10. Even in that one, they were top 4, top 5 in every single one of these categories. That's not hope. That's not taking a gamble on a great defensive mind. That's proof. That's elite play calling with consistent results. And now he's coming back to where it all started, in the pros, Baltimore. This time, though, Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith, Nate Wiggins. So let's be clear about this part. There is no projection, no hoping that's tied to the Ravens defense under Jesse Minter. There's no guesswork. There's no, we'll see. The floor is elite. And the ceiling just got raised, and we'll talk about why. This is a sure thing with the defense. Now let's compare that to what Buffalo did in replacing Sean McDermott, because this is where the contrast becomes unavoidable. Buffalo didn't just lose a head coach. They lost Sean McDermott. And we talked about who he was. That loss is far bigger than people realize because McDermott wasn't just managing games, as we talked about. He was the defensive backbone for the Buffalo Bills. Before Buffalo, he built elite defenses in Carolina. In Buffalo, we saw him masking their inferior personnel on defense and making them a consistent, effective group on the defensive side. Now, when he stabilized that defense, the roster wasn't perfect, but he made that unit better than the sum of its parts. That matters. Because when the Bills' defense had injuries or talent gaps or inconsistency on the back end, McDermott, through his elite coaching schemes, covered that. That stabilizing force is now gone. So who did Buffalo replace him with? Joe Brady. Now, Joe Brady, he has no head coaching experience, but he was the offensive coordinator for the Bills previously. He has a great familiarity with Josh Allen. He's been successful with Josh Allen. However, he knows nothing about that defensive backbone, which means something very simple. Buffalo's offense did not get any better with this hire. It essentially stayed the same. Same guy calling the offense, same guy working with Josh Allen. So Buffalo's offense didn't improve, but Buffalo's defense, it lost its primary architect with McDermott. So let's call it what it actually is. Same offense, worse defense. That's not opinion. That's structure. That is the real effect of the swap. Baltimore upgraded at head coach by installing a proven defensive play caller with a dominant NFL resume. Buffalo downgraded by removing a defensive stabilizer and replacing him with an offensive coach who, though proven, does not elevate the offense as he's shown with the opportunities he's been given. So one team raised both its floor and ceiling, and the other stayed flat on offense and removed the very thing that kept this defense afloat. That is the difference I need you to pay attention to because it matters. So what's the grade? What would you give it? Well, for me, Ravens, Jesse Minter, let's talk about review, proven play caller, multiple elite units, clear schematic identity. I got to give that grade a 9 out of 10 because the Ravens truly did need this type of defense to partner up on the other side of the ball. Let's look at the Bills. Joe Brady, no head coaching experience, no offensive leap last season, loss of defensive stabilization and that capability. That's an average move. That's a flatline move. It's not anything that's going to make them any worse offensively, but the fact that they're getting worse defensively through this hire, I'm giving it a 5 out of 10 for head coaching. That net result means the Baltimore upgraded with their new head coach with Minter, while Buffalo literally regressed because of what they lost on defense. But maybe they made that up with the defensive coordinator. Did they? Let's talk about defensive coordinators right now. This is where the separation becomes glaring because while Baltimore already installed its defensive play caller with the head coach, we know that Jesse Minter has verified he will be calling plays for the defense. Baltimore didn't treat the defensive coordinator like a formality. Baltimore treated defensive coordinator like a weapon. They hired, listen to me, this is where I knew this guy Minter is for real. He's trying to win now. He hired as his defensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver. What? All right, so how do you know this isn't a placeholder hire? First of all, Anthony Weaver is no resume filler coming in to take over defensive coordinator and stand on the sidelines and just let Jesse Minter call the plays. We're talking about a high-end, high-demand defensive mind, a dude that is well-respected across the country for being one of the greatest minds in defense right now. He was interviewing for head coaching jobs and defensive coordinator jobs at the same time as Jesse Minter. And now he's on the same defensive staff with Jesse Minter. We got Anthony Weaver and Jesse Minter on the defense. And there's a reason for that. Think about it. Before coming to Baltimore, Weaver was the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. Now, under Weaver, what did Miami's defense do? Oh, how about this? They ranked top 10 in sacks. Would we love to see that? Would we love to see the Ravens getting more sacks? Under Weaver, Miami's defense improved dramatically against the run. They became far more disciplined structurally, and they consistently outperformed the talent level they had on the roster. He's known for some really specific things that I know we're going to love seeing in this defense. His front multiplicity, the way he can move guys around, the disguises on his heavy packages. He's well reputed for teaching defensive linemen how to wreck protections and maximizing the linebacker and safety versatility. And with the versatile style players that we have on the Baltimore Ravens defensive roster, guys like Kyle Hamilton, this is a guy who knows how to really, really use those weapons. Now, here's where this gets historic, because in my lifetime, which isn't that long, regardless of what some of you say, I can remember only one true Triple Crown defense in the NFL during my lifetime, and that was the 2023 Baltimore Ravens defense. They led the league in fewest points allowed, most sacks, and most takeaways. It's the only defense I've seen do it in real life. Now, that defense, and this is what's key, it was coordinated by Mike Macdonald, whom we now know as the head coach of a Super Bowl team. And on that very same staff, who was there? You guys know. Jesse Minter, now head coach of the Ravens, and Anthony Weaver, now defensive coordinator of the Ravens. So what Baltimore just did, are you seeing it? Baltimore just reunited the entire intellectual core of the most dominant NFL defense in modern history and handed those guys Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith, Nate Wiggins, a deep, vast, versatile roster. This is not a hope play attached to this defense. This is certainty. This is a super defensive coaching unit. Now let's look at what Buffalo did. Remember, Buffalo lost their defensive backbone with Sean McDermott's exit. They didn't get any of that back with Joe Brady's hire. Well, what did they do at defensive coordinator? This is where the contrast that I'm talking about really widens. After Sean McDermott was fired, after a long search, Buffalo hired Jim Leonhard as defensive coordinator. Now, some of you guys are going, who is Jim Leonhard? Well, here's the honest resume. Jim Leonhard, he's a former NFL safety, so he played in the league. He played 10 seasons in the league, including multiple stints with the Bills themselves. So he's a Bills alumni. There I go saying Bulls again. I got Chicago in the mind for some reason. Well, most recently, where did we see Leonhard? Well, Leonhard was the assistant head coach and defensive pass game coordinator for the Denver Broncos for the past 2 seasons. So in Denver, what was he doing? He was helping oversee a defense that finished the last season allowing the second fewest yards per game in the NFL and 4th fewest points. So that defense did do some good work. He was not the coordinator. He was the assistant head coach and defensive pass game coordinator. Prior to that, Leonhard had spent 5 years as the defensive coordinator on the collegiate level with the University of Wisconsin, and there his defenses were known for efficiency, forced turnovers, and strong situational performance. He even finished as the Wisconsin Badgers interim head coach before coming to the NFL. So this isn't a complete rookie when it comes to coaching. But this is Leonhard's first job as an NFL defensive coordinator. First job. So we've seen him on staffs that had success. We've never seen him be the guy on the NFL level and actually call an NFL defense. He's stepping into a much larger role than he's ever had at the pro level. He's moving from positional leadership and pass game planning into total defensive command. That is a big jump. It's a huge jump. And while he was part of a strong Broncos defense, as we pointed out, his role there was coordinator of a component of that defense, not the lead of the entire defensive unit. And that's very different from McDermott, who the Bills just lost. McDermott built identities, schemes, rotations, adjustments, accountability, standards. He did all that for over a decade before coming to the Bills. Leonhard has never had that responsibility in the NFL. So here's the real point. Buffalo's defensive coordinator hire is experienced, intelligent, well-regarded, but it's also his very first NFL defensive coordinator assignment, and he's stepping into a much larger role. That is what we call a gamble. pay off? Absolutely. Could it not? Absolutely. Now contrast that with what Baltimore and the Ravens have done. They've put their proven defensive play caller in charge as head coach. They've also brought back a highly sought-after defensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver, with proven NFL results, both of them. And they've reunited the defensive core of the most dominant defense in recent history. Buffalo's top defensive hire, a promising position coach turned NFL support staff leader, now elevated to full defensive command for the first time. Those are two very different hires. So let's put numbers on it. You ready? You got your pen out? You know what your number is? Here's my grade. Because this isn't just about vibes. This is about structure, resume, and probability of success. The Baltimore Ravens defensive leadership, you've got Jesse Minter, head coach, primary defensive play caller. You got Anthony Weaver, defensive coordinator, a coach who has already been an NFL defensive coordinator. He was interviewed for multiple head coaching jobs and defensive coordinator jobs. He's coordinated top-tier defenses and pressure packages. He has experience leading entire defensive units, not just one position group. And prior shared success under Mike Macdonald, running one of the most dominant defenses we've ever seen. This is not theoretical. My number is built on these facts and these facts alone. Proven NFL defensive leadership layered with redundancy and experience gives this grade, the highest grade I can give, closest to a 10. 9.5 out of 10 for what the Baltimore Ravens did with their defensive coordinator hire with Anthony Weaver. The only reason it's not a 10 is because no staff is perfect, but this is about as close as it gets. Baltimore didn't just fill a spot. They built a defensive superstructure. Now, the Buffalo Bills defensive leadership, they lost Sean McDermott. That's their defensive architect. They promoted an offensive coach to head coach, which makes the defensive coordinator super important. And they chose to fill that with a first-time NFL defensive coordinator who is a respected coach. He's a smart football mind, but someone who has never run an NFL defense before. This is not an indictment on him as a talent or a coach. It's an acknowledgement of risk. Buffalo didn't replace a defensive stabilizer with another stabilizer. They replaced him with a projection, with a hope. And I can't give that better than a 6 out of 10. There is upside. There is intelligence. He could turn out to be one of the next greats. But that uncertainty on defense is dangerous. And that brings us to one of the most debated segments of this entire episode. Because defense is only half the equation. You can build the most dominant defense in football, but if you don't match that with elite offense, you end up exactly where Baltimore has been too many times before. And this is where scarcity matters. This is where my plan that I was hoping the Baltimore Ravens did of going out and seizing one of these scarce elite offensive minds first was born from. There are far more elite defensive minds in the NFL than there are elite offensive play callers. This year alone, listen to this, 18 of the 32 teams in the NFL looked at their offensive coordinator and said, yep, we need to let go of you. Weren't happy with the offensive play caller they had. There are only 14 guys who called themselves offensive coordinators in the NFL last year that still have a job this year. Think about that. That's how rare it is. That means more than half the league is unhappy with these guys. That tells you everything. So here's what we're going to break down. We're going to break down who Baltimore has and does not have at offensive coordinator. We're also going to break down who Buffalo kept and which organization is better positioned after these moves to actually score when it matters, to actually propel their elite quarterbacks to the next level. Because in today's NFL, defense does keep you alive, but offense wins you championships. We see points being scored like never before in this league. Let's talk about the offensive coordinators. This isn't Madden, folks. This isn't We've got talent, so we'll be fine. In the playoffs, the teams that survive most often are the teams that can create answers when the first plan dies. When in the second half, the snow starts falling like a blizzard, as we saw in the NFC Championship a couple of weeks ago. Who can make the right changes? And that's the offensive coordinator. Now, Baltimore's move, who'd they go get? Whew. It was getting thin out there. It was getting thin. But the guy that the Baltimore Ravens went and got of the list that was left is the guy I was hoping they would get. Declan Doyle. Who is Declan Doyle? Now, before you start saying he's never been a coordinator, yes, he has. Never called plays, which there is risk, and we're going to have to factor into this. Declan Doyle would not have been my first hire for offensive coordinator. You guys know I was looking at Kubiak or Mike McDaniel. Those guys obviously unavailable. Declan Doyle, what did we get with him? Well, he's got experience as an offensive coordinator. He came from the Chicago Bears. That's where we got him from. He's not just some random name. And I want to make sure you understand what the commentary and conversation surrounding this guy throughout his career has been. According to ESPN, Doyle comes from the Chicago Bears, where he was their offensive coordinator, and before that, he was the tight ends coach for the Denver Broncos. You guys, I'm so mad we're not keeping Isaiah Likely if we don't keep him. It doesn't look bright. Can you imagine this guy with a talent like Isaiah Likely? He knows tight ends. He loves tight ends. Look what he was doing over there with Ben Johnson with the Chicago Bears and their tight ends. 2 tight ends that they fed all the time. That could have been Andrews and Likely. Anyhow, this matters because it tells you 2 things. One, Doyle's been in the NFL recently where offense was the entire mission. He's been building that thing. Not be conservative and win with defense. That's not what we saw the Bears do with him and Ben Johnson over there. I'm talking modern football structure, spacing, timing, marrying the run and the pass game. If you look at what Ben Johnson and this guy were doing over there with Chicago this year, it was a thing of beauty. Putting the cornerback in a situation where he has answers that are reliable and schemed, not prayers and go save us. Number 2, Doyle's been developing pieces, not just calling plays, tight ends, protection rules, route structure. That's where a lot of offensive coordinators fail. They can draw it up, but they can't really build the machine. You know what I mean? He knows how to do that. And here's the bigger point. Baltimore didn't hire a name. They hired a profile. Someone who's recognized as being a modern offensive builder. So even if you don't know his name today, you're going to know his fingerprints. If Lamar's offense stops looking like, Lamar, go save us, and instead starts looking like what we've been asking for, a system that attacks you every inch and fully uses the running and passing game in a scheme that is impossible for defenses to keep track of. Now, what did Buffalo do? Buffalo went and hired Pete Carmichael Jr. Well, we know they promoted Joe Brady to head coach and hired Pete Carmichael Jr. as their offensive coordinator. Now, Carmichael, he's not some mystery resume. Let's get that out. Per reporting cited in the write-up, Carmichael's been a long-time Sean Payton assistant, just like somebody else we know, Declan Doyle from the Sean Payton tree. Carmichael spent years as the offensive coordinator in New Orleans. He most recently worked as senior offensive assistant with the Broncos, working once again with Sean Payton. So Buffalo's choice in this instance is experience. He's a veteran guy. He's a system guy. He's a steady hand. Carmichael is someone who's been around elite offensive structure before. So here's the difference between these 2 situations. Baltimore is betting on an offensive mind that fits the next era. Buffalo is betting on continuity and experience under a head coach who is going to continue calling the plays for Josh Allen and the Bills, who's already running their offense, and has just brought on an offensive coordinator with experience to support him in that. So when you evaluate this, you got to ask, is Buffalo's offense changing with the Carmichael hire? Or is it going to stay largely the same with a new voice in the room? And while you're thinking about that, ask yourself this question. Is Baltimore's offense getting a significant change, philosophical shift toward modern structure to match Lamar's ceiling as the ultimate weapon in the NFL? That's the question. And with that question in my mind, that's how I scored these two hires. You got your pen out? Here's my scores. Let's put it in real numbers. Baltimore's offensive coordinator hire with Declan Doyle, 7 out of 10. Why? Because it's improving. It's not proven. That's why I can't give it the 9.5 that I gave the defensive coordinator position. But it is definitely an improvement from John Harbaugh. Declan Doyle checks the right boxes. He's got a modern background, system familiarity, developmental upside, and he's from the Sean Payton tree and the Ben Johnson tree, two of the greatest play callers in the game right now. But he hasn't called games himself at the highest level, long enough for anyone to pretend that this is already a slam dunk. It is a calculated bet, which is why I'm only giving it a 7 out of 10. Buffalo's offensive coordinator hire, I also am giving a 7 out of 10, but for the opposite reason. This isn't about upside with the Carmichael hire. This is about experience. Pete Carmichael isn't here to transform their offense. He isn't here to elevate it, and he isn't the guy designing the plays. That's going to be Brady, the head coach. All Carmichael was hired to be is a stabilizer, a veteran voice. He's a role filler who can be in the room and give stability because he's been there before. So Buffalo is getting steadiness, but Baltimore gets growth potential. Same grade, 7 out of 10. Very different intents with these two hires. One team is trying to build forward. The other is trying to hold the line. That distinction matters, especially in January. And if the Ravens gamble on a guy who's never called plays before but has this huge reputation as an offensive mind and has the pedigree, if that pays off, these scores change dramatically in the Ravens' favor. Now, this is the part of the conversation that most national shows never get to, because head coaches and coordinators, obviously, those are the guys that grab the headlines. But position coaches are where championships quietly get built. And this is where, in my opinion, the Ravens didn't just win. They lapped the field. Dwayne Leffert. Y'all saw what I had to say as soon as I heard about this hire. Dwayne Leffert being hired as the offensive line coach. We got to start right here, folks, because this might be one of the most important hires of this Baltimore coaching cycle, because he's not just a good offensive line coach. He's nationally respected. Dwayne Leffert as one of the very best offensive line teachers and schemers in all of football, college or NFL. Here's why that matters. Leffert's specialty is wide zone and hybrid zone concepts. That matters because wide zone stretches the edges where historically Derrick Henry has been the most dangerous guy put on film. Wide zone is what he specializes in. Forces linebackers to hesitate. Opens massive play action windows. We got Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. You get a guy who's the best at scheming offensive lines to get the play action going? Who better to run play action than the tandem of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry? Let me say that part for the people that need to hear it again. Lamar Jackson plus Derrick Henry plus a properly schemed offensive wide zone line? That is borderline unfair. This hire isn't just about blocking It's about unlocking the offensive structurally. Structurally, we have the pieces, but they have not been unlocked because our offensive line has been one of the worst in the league. Structurally, have the pieces, schematically and personnel-wise on the O-line, suspect. Now let's talk resume. Real resume for Leffert. In Atlanta, he coached multiple top 10 offensive lines. Had Atlanta's offensive line living in the top 10. He oversaw elite run blocking and above average pass protection. Not either or. That's important. Because remember, the Ravens would do well in run blocking grades, but then in pass blocking, where Lamar was taking all those hits, proved to be terrible. Ledford's O-lines grade high, elite in both categories. He's helped produce multiple 1,000-yard rushing seasons, and here's the part that doesn't get enough credit. Last season, pay attention, the Falcons lost at the beginning of the year through the injury bug 2 of their starting members of the offensive line, 2 of their better players on the O-line, that top 10 O-line that they had. But because Ledford is so good at teaching as a coach on the O-line, do you realize that offensive line didn't collapse? They didn't fall back to join the Ravens as far as being one of the worst offensive lines in the country. No. Even with those injuries, even losing nearly half their line to injuries. Ledford had the Atlanta team finishing as one of the top 14 offensive lines in the country in functional pass protection, and they remained efficient in the run game. That is coaching. That is adaptability. That is teaching. And that is what just walked into Baltimore and got gifted with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. This hire acts by itself as a pressure release valve on the new offensive coordinator who's calling plays for the first time. Your calls get cleaner when you have a dominant offensive line. Your margin for error expands. Your offense travels. What kind of grade do I give hiring this dude as the offensive line? Coach, you know I'm giving it a 9.5 out of 10. Why not 10 out of 10? We already talked about it. No hire is perfect, but this is an elite, ceiling-raising hire that the Baltimore Ravens were in desperate need for. Now here's the most important nuance that I have to say. You've heard all this excitement. As elite as this coaching pairing is, and it is elite, Declan Doyle as offensive coordinator, Dwayne Leffert as offensive line coach. Scheme alone, coaches alone do not unlock ceilings because they also need personnel. Coaching raises potential, yes, but players realize it. Can I say that again? Coaching raises potential, but players realize it. Declan Doyle has already lived through exactly the blueprint that I believe Baltimore needs to follow. Last year in Chicago, under head coach Ben Johnson, there was a deliberate, aggressive offseason line rebuild for the offense. Not in theory, but in execution. The timeline matters here. Let me run you through this timeline. So Ben Johnson was named head coach on January 21st last year. It's kind of like us. You know, we got a new head coach in January. Declan Doyle was hired as his offensive coordinator just 7 days later on January 28th. January hire. That means Doyle wasn't brought in after these decisions were made, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Doyle was a part of what I'm about to share with you that the Bears did from day one. He was in the building for this entire evaluation process, and he was part of identifying the problem that the Bears had, and he was part of executing the solution. And what was that? Well, let's look. You'll see what I'm talking about. Free agency showed up on March 12th. March 12th, 2025, less than 2 months after Doyle and Johnson were in the Bears building. Look at what their evaluation led to them doing. On the very first day of free agency, Chicago made its move. They traded a 4th-round pick to Kansas City for Joe Thuney, offensive lineman. Then 2 hours later, they traded a 6th-round pick to the Rams for Jonah Jackson, offensive lineman. 2 proven veteran interior offensive linemen, same day, same plan. They saw the problem. They needed an offensive line for Caleb Williams. At that point, Ben Johnson hadn't even been coached, 51 days? This wasn't patience. This wasn't hoping young players develop. They went out there and got what they wanted because they knew it was urgent. Less than 24 hours after making that move on March 13th, the Bears signed Drew Dalman to a 3-year, $42 million contract. Whew. Offensive line. In the span of one day, Chicago had rebuilt the entire interior of their offensive line. And Declan Doyle witnessed and participated in all of that. How did it turn out? How'd that work out for the Bears? Well, Joe Thuney earned first-team All-Pro honors. Then he shifted to left tackle in the playoffs due to injuries and still performed at a high level. Jonah Jackson received All-Pro votes and was later named to the Pro Bowl. Chicago doubled down on that because in the draft, they spent a 2nd-round pick on Ozzie Trapillo, which added another offensive lineman to the pipeline. That's 4 new offensive linemen added between free agency and the draft. That was not a cosmetic change. That was commitment. And the results were absolutely undeniable. The year before this overhaul, before Ben Johnson and Declan Doyle came in and did this overhaul to the Chicago Bears offensive line, Chicago's quarterback had been sacked 68 times in the previous year. Because they evaluated that and said, no, we can't have that, and rebuilt that O-line, spent the money, gave up trades, gave up picks to build the O-line. 1 year later, Caleb Williams only got sacked 24 times. That's not marginal improvement. That's a transformation. And it came with the 3rd best rushing offense in the NFL, and they don't have anybody on their roster named Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. This is why this matters in Baltimore. Because Declan Doyle isn't guessing now about what he needs to do. He's seen the blueprint. He's been a part of it. He's executed it. And now he's paired with one of the best offensive line coaches in Dwayne Leffert. You're going to have Doyle and Dwayne Leffert evaluating the Ravens' offensive line the same way. Identify the weaknesses honestly, something Harbaugh was never willing to do. Can I say Falele? Can I say Voorhees? These 2 guys are going to attack that aggressively, and they're going to prioritize veteran stability. I want you to picture this. A top 5 offensive line in front of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry? That doesn't just improve your production. That creates historic outcomes. We have the coaches. But as Ben Johnson and Declan Doyle proved in Chicago, you have to have the personnel. And I do believe that Jesse Minter's staff that he's brought in, he's going to support in doing what they need to do to cause that same effect, that same change in Baltimore. Watch out if that happens. But let's compare that to what Buffalo did with their offensive line coach. The Bills hired Pat Meyer. Now, he's formerly of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and to be clear, this is not a bad coach. This is a solid, experienced offensive line voice. Let's look what he did in Pittsburgh. So Meyer, his lines improved over time. His offensive line, pass protection became a real strength for them. If you can remember how tough it was to get to 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers, even though he couldn't move like much, that pass protection for Rodgers became elite last year. In 2025, that unit under Pat Meyer finished as a top 10 offensive line unit, according to PFF. But here's the key distinction. Meyer's units were trend up. They weren't consistently elite. In his earlier seasons, he'd been middle of the pack with run blocking, inconsistent on the push, and the development, it took time. that doesn't mean failure. It just means he's a great role player in this position as offensive line coach, but he's not what you would call a game changer. And that context matters because Buffalo already had a good offensive line. Buffalo has consistently had top 3, 4, 5 offensive lines in the country. This is already a strength of Buffalo. It's one of the main reasons I keep trying to tell people, quit trying to compare what Lamar Jackson has done to what your guy Josh Allen has been doing over there, because Lamar Jackson's been running for his life his entire career behind a suspect offensive line, whereas Josh Allen has been performing behind one of the best offensive lines in the league, and that is not going to change. That's not going to become worse for Josh Allen with this hire. It's a good hire. It's a stabilizing hire, but it's not a ceiling-changing hire. The Bills will continue to have an elite offensive line, as they've had previously. That's why I'm giving this grade a 7 out of 10. Now, I do have to give an honorable mention to Mike Mickens, the cornerbacks coach that the Ravens hired, because Baltimore just keeps cooking. They landed Mike Mickens. If that name sounds familiar, it should. Mickens was at Notre Dame, and NFL teams have been trying to grab this guy from Notre Dame. Why? Because he's developed guys like Kyle Hamilton, Sauce Gardner. I mean, all types of guys that have become NFL-ready DBs with elite technique and processing. He's not just a recruiter. He's a developer. Now he walks into a room where he gets to rejoin ranks with Kyle Hamilton. He's going to be working with Nate Wiggins. He's got a defense being run by Jesse Minter, and it's coordinated by Anthony Weaver. That's not just good staffing, folks. This is a defensive supergroup. This is going to be good for his growth. His first NFL job, he's going to be working with these guys? Wow. Wow is all I can say about that. Mickens raises the technical floor of the secondary immediately. Footwork, leverage, eyes, communication, all things that guys have played under him at Notre Dame have gone on to excel in on the pro level. This is an amazing grade at this position. I give it an 8.5 out of 10. It's a huge high ceiling. It's a perfect fit, and it's a massive long-term value for the Baltimore Ravens. And I can't get this news in quick enough because the Ravens have made another hire on this team. It's amazing. Do you realize the Denver Broncos offensive coordinator is now on staff with the Baltimore Ravens as a senior offensive assistant? Woo! Mentor is cooking, y'all. Joe Lombardi, former offensive coordinator just a few weeks ago, was offensive coordinator for the Broncos in the NFC Championship game. Long time right-hand man for Sean Payton, is now on staff with Declan Doyle. Oh, my goodness. The Sean Payton tree is getting stronger and stronger in the Baltimore offense. This is a veteran guy. So you put the veteran leadership, the guy who's been there before, couple him up with someone he's familiar with, same type scheme with Declan Doyle. They work together at the Broncos under Sean Payton. They're familiar with one another. There's that chemistry that's already there, and that experience, that cohesiveness. Wow. Anybody seen how Sean Payton and Ben Johnson offenses use the wide zone, utilize the pass and the running schemes and the tight ends? Man, listen. Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, I think Rashad Bateman's going to see huge dividends from this offense. Rashad, watch what happens. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and I so hope we somehow figure out how to keep Isaiah Likely and Andrews. Whew. Man, this is crazy. We gotta stop talking theory, because there's a clear winner in this in this cycle of the coaching scheme between the Ravens and the Bills. Let's put the numbers on the screen. Because when you step back and look at this objectively, the separation between these two organizations, it becomes undeniable. We gave each team a possible 40 points total. 40 points, that's 10 for head coach, 10 for offensive coordinator, 10 for defensive coordinator, and 10 for offensive line coach. Same scale, same criteria, no excuses. Let's start with where each team began. Buffalo started this process in the hole. They lost Sean McDermott, a defensive architect, not a vibes guy, not a motivator, a schematic stabilizer, a real value to their defense. That's a -7 before you even hire anyone. Baltimore, by contrast, lost John Harbaugh, a culture coach, a delegator, not a schematic driver. That was a -2. So already Buffalo is chasing. Now let's add the hires in. When you tally everything up, here's where it lands. Baltimore Ravens on a potential 40 points end up with a score of 33, while the Buffalo Bills are 18 out of 40. That is a 15-point gap. And here's the part people need to hear clearly. Buffalo's loss is almost entirely on defense. They removed the one man who consistently elevated that unit, and they replaced him with unproven promise. A first-time NFL defensive coordinator who's smart, respected, but learning on the job. In the NFL, learning on defense gets exposed fast. You don't ease into defensive play calling. You either solve the problems in real time or offenses put 30 on you. Buffalo didn't just lose McDermott. They lost defensive continuity, situational mastery, and the man who covered up the roster cracks year after year. That's why I believe we see Buffalo slide backward on defense this season. Not collapse. I'm not predicting that. Not implode, but certainly regress. Meanwhile, Baltimore did the opposite. The Ravens installed a proven defensive play caller as head coach. They reunited the intellectual core of a historic defense, and they layered that with elite personnel. Their defensive floor is higher. Their margin for error is wider, and their ceiling, championship level. They unlocked their offense. See, that's key because they didn't just win on the defensive side. They unlocked their offense by striking gold with Dwayne Ledford, one of the best offensive line coaches ever. They fixed the one thing that held this team back because now Lamar Jackson isn't just running for survival. Derrick Henry isn't just running into unblocked defenders. Play action actually threatens now. An elite offensive line doesn't just protect. It is a talent multiplier. And when you multiply Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, that's how you break games. That's how you break defenses. That's how you break seasons. So when you look at the scores, these scores, this isn't Ravens bias. This isn't Bills hate. This is trajectory. Buffalo is hoping to hold serve, and you can tell that by the hires they made. Baltimore is accelerating. And this year, I think we see it on Sundays. I think we see it on tape and on the scoreboard. That is the difference. What do you guys think? Who do you think won between these two teams? I'd love to hear it in the comments. Next episode, we're heading to Pittsburgh. New coach, new structure, same expectations. Ravens versus Steelers. Who actually got better? That's a division rival. We're going to keep breaking this down. Yes, the Steelers are next. We're also going to do the Browns after that. We're going to do Miami. We're covering everybody because as long as this staff keeps stacking like they're doing in Baltimore, we have a saying in the North. Minter is coming. If you're not ready for what that means, you're about to find out. You Game of Thrones fans know what I'm talking about. Fam, thank you for being here. This has been an amazing episode. Appreciate you guys being here. We are pushing this channel in the direction we've been shooting for. Thank you for everybody who's got us up to knocking on the 1,600 subs. If you haven't yet, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Please tell a friend, because these conversations matter. And remember, there's one thing this world will never be too full of. That thing is love. So find somebody that needs a little bit more in their life. Give it to them for me, all right? For One Flock, I'm your host, Rob Love, saying thanks for flying with the brother. We'll see you next time on One Flock. Let's fly.
We take the field as one flock. No waving till we go as one flock. We keep grinding till we soar to the top. Come on, raving till we go as one flock. We keep grinding till we soar to the top. Let's